Hello, and welcome back to the series of Understanding the Nature of Man. Today we're going over the topic, maybe a brief introduction into the main study of the Sabbath. Right, and before we begin, as per usual, as you can see here, my mouse is near the like bar. You can click the settings, you see playback speed and click that as is normal. And you click 1.5 speed, or you can go 1.75, whichever. And the purpose of that is to make the video go faster, which helps to make it bearable for you to listen to me because I do speak pretty slow. I may have some gaps in what I'm saying, and to make it a little bit faster and bearable to listen to, you can speed up the video. You'll still be able to understand what I'm saying, even though you sped up the video, so you don't need to worry about that. It's just a better experience to have the speed up. Now, going back. No. Should know this by now that when it's a main study, this means there's an even deeper study that goes way more into biblical details, proving the doctrine was true and bringing to the reader/listener more understanding. This is a much needed study to listen and understand now, because if this is not spoken about now, the topic after this, I believe, will not have a long lasting impression on people's hearts as it should, because the next topic is a very important topic for our salvation. How to keep the Sabbath holy, part 1. This is again credit to Amazing Facts, because like I usually say, their stuff is a lot of the stuff that I would like to say, they would word it a lot better, and that's why I use their stuff. Otherwise, I would just do my own thing by God's will. Anyways, during the Paris Olympics in 1924, Scotsman Eric Liddell, the son of a missionary and a celebrated sprinter, was expected to win gold in the 100-meter race. However, he discovered that the time trials for his event were going to fall on Sunday, which he believed to be the biblical Sabbath. Even though he relentlessly trained and his country had emotionally and financially invested in him, he absolutely refused to run in a race on that day. This difficult decision put him under immense pressure from politicians, teammates, and even some friends. And they would say, God will understand, they pleaded. Your country is counting on you. Do it just this one time. But he said, no, I can't do it. Not even once. Well, it later turned out, providentially, that Liddell could run in another event that did not conflict with his beliefs, the 400-meter run. However, during the time trials, he didn't perform very well. Teammates wondered about his ability to secure even a bronze medal, but Liddell believed the results were in God's hands. All he needed to do was do his best. So even he knew that he had to put in effort, right? Then, just prior to running the final heat, he was handed a slip of paper from an American trainer with this profound message written on it. Those who honor me, I will honor. 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 30. When the start gun sounded, Liddell went off like a shot, ran like lightning, and broke the standing record to finish first. Eric Liddell firmly believed in obeying God, no matter the cost, and that meant following every one of his 10 commandments, including the fourth. Of course, he didn't know the truth of the fourth commandment, but remember, as God teaches, he wants his people to live up to the light that they have. This deep faithfulness and devotion is to be admired. Even if he had the specific day wrong, he had the principle right. For him, the Sabbath commandment was no less important than the ones that say, do not murder and do not commit adultery. It's very difficult for some people to wrap their minds around that idea, After all, they say it's just a day. But I also believe it is absolutely true that this commandment is as equally important as any other. Very few people, after accepting Christ, dispute 9 of the 10 commandments, but the fourth they often see as a personal preference or an optional commandment. But it's not just a recommendation from Moses, it's the very law of the Almighty. The Bible tells us, "For whoever shall keep the whole law and yet stumble in one point, he is guilty of all." James chapter 2 verse 10. The devil doesn't care whether your sin is adultery or idolatry or murder or Sabbath breaking, just as long as he can get you to sin and separate you from God. He knows that in God's view, the Sabbath commandment is not any less important than the other 9. That's why I believe it is the devil's plan to erode our convictions about the Sabbath through rationalizations and compromises, so that when the big test of the last days comes, when we must choose whom we will worship on penalty of death, many people will have been so trained to stumble that they won't be prepared to take a stand. That's why it is so important to be faithful now in keeping the Sabbath holy. It's all about preparation. And I did, so one quick thing. I said in an earlier video, right, that we're basically living, this world has realistically been around for 6,000 years, and it's about to end, right? We're at the end of this world's history. Jesus is about to come back, which would show and typify that the 7,000 years, like God made the earth in 6 days, and then the seventh day he rested. This earth has been going on for like 6,000 years, and it's about to end. And this brings back to mind that we can see right now that we are living in a time of preparation. So you can say that this time period is preparation day. It's like it's Friday, right? And then when God comes back and destroys the wicked and stuff and takes up his people, that'll be like after that, it'll be like the 1,000 years starts. That's pretty much the seventh day God rested, right, from his work. So it's the same kind of connection, but basically. Just wanted to mention that. So we have so like the time we have now, because we are living in the Day of Atonement, and we are living at the end of the 6,000 years. And again, that is a deeper study for another time, but I just wanted to mention that for the connection that you can see there. Again, you probably might not be able to because I worded it poorly, but maybe some people are able to see the connection through my terrible wording. But before we delve too far into the hows of keeping the Sabbath holy, let's first begin by determining what it means for a day to be holy. What is holy? Let's start our study of the Sabbath by taking a careful look at the commandment itself found in Exodus 20. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor. So keep in mind, in this commandment, it's saying that 6 days you are to basically work. And do all your work, but on the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work. So just right there, we are to do no work on this one day. You, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. So let's say to the person who's the man of the house, right? The man of the house is supposed to make nobody, not even his own cattle, be working on that day. Everybody should be resting. So everybody in that house are attending the Sabbath on the exact same day. But one, for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. So this is Exodus chapter 20, verse 8 through 11. So you can see here that there is a certain day that God rested on and hallowed it. Because remember, when you read the wording, and rested on the seventh day, notice it doesn't say a seventh day. It says the seventh day. Where's the seventh day? Remember, if you guys read through Genesis and see how God made the earth, right? You can number it down. How God made one day, what he did on that one day, what he created, to the second day, to the third day, and then he made man on the sixth day, and then he rested from his work on the seventh day. And that's basically the last day of the week. So again, the rest of that will be more explained in a deeper study. God says there is holy time. What does he mean? The word holy means something dedicated, set apart, or consecrated to God. And it's clear from the Bible that some things are holy and should not be profaned or treated as common. For one, marriage is called holy. You can court someone for years, but it's not a holy relationship until you seal the covenant and marry him or her. Profaning that holy relationship is a violation of the commandment against adultery. Tithe is also called holy. Leviticus chapter 27 verse 30. It can be hard to grasp that $1 among every $10 of income you earn is considered holy by God. But nonetheless, using that sacred 10% to make a car payment profanes something God has declared to be sacred. Well, likewise, God also points out in the Sabbath commandment that a certain amount of time each week is holy, not because a particular church teaches it, but because he said so. No man in the world can call common what God has blessed as holy, nor does God say, remember the Sabbath to make it holy. We can't make it holy. God is the one who makes something holy. In the fourth commandment, he is saying, I've already made it holy. So recognize what I have done and respect me. Keeping the Sabbath holy is all about a love relationship with God. The Sabbath before the commandments. Did you know that the fourth commandment takes us all the way back to Genesis? Thus, the heavens and the earth and all the hosts of them were finished. And on the seventh day, God ended his work, which he had done. And he rested on the seventh day from all his work, which he had done. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it. Notice how he sanctified it? He didn't just sanctify a certain day. Just any day. He sanctified a certain day. Because in it he rested from all his work, which God had created and made. Genesis chapter 2, verse 1 through 3. The Sabbath was not made only for the Jews, but for all humanity. Remember, Jews weren't really like a whole thing till later, right? And the commandments was way before the Jews thing was like a whole nation. This is why Jesus said, the Sabbath was made for man. Mark chapter 2, verse 27. He is referring back to the time of the Garden of Eden. The Sabbath was made for all mankind. The idea that the Sabbath was first presented at Mount Sinai is a common misunderstanding. Exodus chapter 20 might be where we hear God first speaking the fourth commandment. In fact, he hasn't even written it down in stone at this point. But it is in Exodus 16, a few chapters before the commandment is actually spoken by God, that the Lord rains down manna from the heavens 6 days a week. On Fridays, the Israelites were to collect twice as much manna because there would be no manna raining down from the sky on the seventh day of the week. God was treating the Sabbath as if it was something the Jews already clearly understood. When some of them went out on the Sabbath looking for bread, God responded, "How long will you refuse to keep my laws?" He was calling the Sabbath a law before they ever arrived at Mount Sinai. That's an important point to keep note of. Does mankind need rest? Yes. This principle comes from the very beginning. Some believe that because the Bible is silent on something, it must not have existed. Yet, because you don't read a lot about the Sabbath in Genesis, it's no reason to assume that it wasn't there or didn't exist. Still, it's quite obvious that it was there when God rested on the seventh day and hallowed it at the creation. In fact, there is no spoken or written commandment before Mount Sinai that says we're not to commit adultery. But Joseph acknowledged that adultery was a sin even before God wrote it in the Ten Commandments. It's clearly stated in Genesis chapter 39, verse 9. And of course, it was a sin for Cain to kill Abel long before God said, "You shall not murder." There is none greater in this house than I. Neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Genesis chapter 39, verse 9. So this was when Joseph was being tempted by Potiphar's wife, who, of course, you know how it happened, what happened after he tried to run away. She got his coat and false accused him, and he got sent to prison. You guys know the rest of the story. Also take notice, when you look at the Ten Commandments, how many of them involve the word keep? Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. The commandment does not say, "You shall not keep adultery." There is one place in the commandment dealing with idolatry that says, "Showing mercy unto thousands that love me and keep my commandments." But that's really a general phrase for all the commandments. So the only law that specifically uses the word keep is the Sabbath commandment. It seems strange then that it's really the only commandment that much of the Christian world says is no longer an obligation to keep. But as we've seen, it was there in creation at the beginning, and the Bible promises it's going to be in the new earth. Isaiah chapter 66, verse 22 through 23. God wants us to keep it now. It is an eternal, holy gift to all creation. For as the new heavens and the new earth, which I will make, shall remain before me, saith the Lord, so shall your seed and your name remain. And it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, shall all flesh come and worship before me, saith the Lord. Isaiah chapter 66, verse 22 through 23. A dangerous topic. Unfortunately, it is easy to be misunderstood or to appear to be extreme when someone is committed to Sabbath observance. It might even be labeled legalistic. In the time of Jesus, two fanatical religious groups struggled for supremacy, and the Sadducees and the Pharisees. They were, for lack of better words, the liberals and the conservatives of their day. The Sadducees didn't believe in angels or resurrection. That's pretty liberal theology. The Pharisees, on the other hand, were so meticulous in their Sabbath keeping, they manufactured many intricate rules to ensure you didn't walk too far on the Sabbath or carry anything that might be considered a burden. For instance, I understand that devout Pharisees carried a ball of string they would travel to measure off the distance they traveled, to ensure they would only walk the appropriate distance on any given Sabbath. They didn't want to carry a burden on the Sabbath day either. And if you carried a handkerchief to blow your nose on the Sabbath, it was a burden and you were considered to be working. So they got around their own rules by sewing the handkerchief to their clothes. They'd blow their nose on the hanky, which was now considered a part of their clothing. It doesn't sound very good to us to blow our nose on our clothes, but they figured at least they wouldn't be carrying a burden. They had hundreds of such man-made rules about the Sabbath and other religious duties. Well, Jesus often battled with the Pharisees regarding Sabbath observance. He would heal somebody that day and then be accused of breaking the Sabbath. While the commandment certainly doesn't forbid healing on the Sabbath, and Jesus, God himself, did it, we should also realize that Jesus never responded to his accusers by saying, "You don't need to keep the Sabbath anymore." Every debate he had about the Sabbath was about how to keep it holy, not whether or not to keep it. Interestingly, the spiritual problem in the time of Christ was certainly more about legalism. But before then, in the time of Jeremiah and Isaiah, Sabbath problems were more like the problems we face today. The Jews in their time were largely ignoring the Sabbath, not keeping it any better than the pagans. They were being careless in their Sabbath observance, and that's the crisis in the Christian community at large today. We treat God's commandment with sloppy indifference. As a pastor, I'm not just writing to you, I'm writing to the Bachelor family. My wife, Karen. So basically this is Pastor Doug Batchelor writing all this. And I are constantly educating and reminding ourselves about what is right and what is not right about the Sabbath. We are living in such a relentlessly busy culture that it takes conscious thought, planning, and effort to really rest. I confess that at times I've neglected to keep the Sabbath the way I should. So this isn't about judging you. Rather, it's a Bible study for all people who love the Lord and want to do his will. It's not legalistic to love the Lord and want to please him by showing you're serious about keeping the Sabbath day holy according to his commandment. And remember, Jesus does say, "If ye love me, keep my commandments." So don't let people accuse you of being legalistic because you're asking practical questions about what a person should and shouldn't do on the Sabbath. That's our purpose here, to ask realistic questions that help us get closer to God's will for our lives. Finding out how to keep it holy. The Ten Commandments are in some ways an abbreviation of the law of God. For instance, when it says, "You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain," the commandment doesn't go into great detail to explain every possible way in which a person could take God's name in vain. Whether it's by swearing, using God's name carelessly, or claiming you're a Christian but living as a hypocrite. Exodus chapter 20, verse 7. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain. Exodus chapter 20, verse 7. So this is me here saying this, Chris. I personally believe many people also don't remember this commandment of not taking the Lord's name in vain. I feel like a lot of people don't actually know what that commandment it means, because remember, the commandments are actually broad. I feel like a lot of people don't know what it means because a lot of people who claim to be Christian definitely do not, at the very least, speak as they should be speaking. I'll leave it at that and talk more about that commandment another day. The commandment that says to not commit adultery is pretty brief. See Exodus chapter 20, verse 14. But I think and I know there is a lot more to that one statement than a commentary on husband and wife. What else does it involve? How about two people who aren't married having You know that word. I'm saying that in case any children are watching. Or listening. Is it adultery then? You must invest a little practical study and understanding in how to rightly obey the adultery commandment when you're married and when you're not married. As Jesus clearly teaches, it's broader than the summary statement you find etched in stone. So the details of the law require our further study, and you'll find examples of this commandment being honored or disregarded in other ways in many places in the Bible. In regard to our goal of better understanding the fourth commandment, we also need to look at the specifics of Scripture through a study of Bible principles. For example, in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 11, we read, "Let us labor, therefore, to enter into that rest." Laboring to rest? That sounds like a contradiction, doesn't it? But that's really what happens when we prepare for the Sabbath. We invest additional labor so that we might enjoy the blessed rest of the Sabbath more fully. While I'm not comparing the Sabbath with a typical family vacation, if you're going to have a good vacation, it does require extra work, planning, and preparation to make it happen. I believe that in order for us to really enjoy the release and peace that God has designed for His holy day, we must labor to enter the Sabbath rest. And this involves educating ourselves. God, throughout His Word, gives us a lot more details about what is involved in keeping the Sabbath holy. As we'll see, it does not mean that you simply swing in a hammock all day long, sipping pineapple juice through a straw. There's a lot more to God's rich rest. Of course, the fourth commandment is also the longest of all the commandments, precisely because it goes into the most detail. It says that people are to rest, their animals are to rest, their servants are to rest, everybody within their gates, their border of authority, are to rest and enjoy the fruits of the Sabbath day. The Sabbath commandment is also somewhat different from most of the others because it makes statements in both a positive sense and a negative sense. Most of the others are only stated in the negative, "you shall not." The Sabbath commandment says, "You shall keep it holy," and "you shall not work." It gives both sides, so I'm going to approach this message in the same way. Preparing for the Sabbath. John Wesley tells a good story about a devoted new convert to Christianity who was hurrying to shine all his shoes just before the Sabbath. It took him about 15 minutes to do each shoe. Well, he got one shoe done, but realized the sun would go down before he could finish the other one, so he put it away. Did he make the right decision? He went to church the next day with one bright, shiny shoe and one dull, scuffed shoe. Would you call him a fanatic? Maybe even a Pharisee? I believe to call this fanaticism is to misunderstand the principle that specific time is declared holy by God. This does bring back to mind where after Jesus died, Mary tried to do work for his tomb, but when she and some others saw that the sun was coming down, they knew it was the Sabbath and they stopped what they were doing and they went back home to keep the Sabbath. We think, how can it be okay to be shining a shoe one moment, but then after a few more ticks of the clock, it suddenly is sin? Well, in a similar way, a young man might have a girlfriend he is very fond of, but it's inappropriate for him to gaze upon her unclothed form or to be with her intimately. But after they have some vows before God in a wedding ceremony, suddenly what was once a sin is now holy and good. So yes, little things like the tick of a clock or saying "I do" can mean all the difference between holy and common. In many of our Sabbath-keeping homes, We have become very sloppy, saying, "Oh, the sun is down, but I've still got a few more dishes to do." And why stop mowing the lawn at sundown when you only have a few more passes to make to complete the job? It's not that big of a deal, right, God? For one thing, what is your unbelieving neighbor thinking as he drives by and sees that the sun is down and you're still mowing? What message are you sending to your family and your neighborhood? So in this case, you could basically say you're evangelizing whether you realize it or not. In your mind, the devil is saying it's not a big deal. In the mind of the witness, the devil is calling you a hypocrite. It is part of Satan's game to highlight our inconsistencies and to erode our commitment. Please don't let him use you as a pawn in his game. And most important, God is watching. So it truly is better to leave something common undone than to defile the edges of the Sabbath. What is your attitude? Does God want us to dread the approaching Sabbath? No. He wants it to be a blessing. But if we don't have a love relationship with Jesus, we'll be watching the clock instead of enjoying time with him. When the Sabbath nears, we'll be thinking, "Oh heavens, I've got all this stuff to do. Is it Sabbath already? Now I don't have time to do it." It's as if the Sabbath is a burden rather than a blessing. That's not the attitude God wants us to have. God wants us to eagerly look forward to the Sabbath. And who hasn't heard a young child say, "Is it still Sabbath?" They're looking for the moment they can do whatever they want, right? I have even caught myself looking wistfully out the window at twilight and wondering if the Sabbath is over so I can get on with my next project. I'm ashamed of having done that. Should we have that kind of attitude? It means we need a change in our hearts. The Bible mentions that this very thing was a problem even in the Old Testament times. In Amos chapter 8 verse 5, people say, When will the new moon be gone, that we may sell corn, and the Sabbath, that we may set forth wheat? They were waiting for the sun to go down and the Sabbath to be over so they could do their own thing. Well, let's suppose a young man is smitten by a young woman, but because of their schedules, they can only spend a few hours a week together. He arranges his schedule to get all his business concluded, but while they're together, she's talking to him and he doesn't seem to be paying attention. As they're walking side by side, she says, "You seem like you're 1,000 miles away." As they're walking side by side, she says, "You seem like you're 1,000 miles away." He confesses, "Well, I'm thinking about my next work project I've got coming up this week." Or, what if they're sitting together over a dinner that she's spent time preparing, and he keeps checking the text messages on his phone or looking at the clock saying, "Is our date over yet? You mind if I leave early?" What would that say about his heart? Would that hurt her feelings? His words and attitude indicates something is wrong with the relationship. We want the Lord to have our hearts, and when he has our hearts, we won't be asking those kinds of questions about the Sabbath. God wants the Sabbath to be a delight, and believe the more we come to know and love God, the more delightful the Sabbath will become. The Sabbath is a time for rest, so it should start and end with peaceful and biblical worship. There ought to be decisive beginnings and endings we should guard the edges of the Sabbath. We shouldn't be scrambling around an hour after the Sabbath has begun and saying, "Well, I guess we should stop what we're doing and have a little prayer." Instead of really worshiping, singing, and reading something of substance, we're in a state of hurried panic. True, it does take a little more effort and planning to give God the honor he deserves. If a great king were coming to visit our home, we would plan how to prepare for his entrance and receive him with honor and respect. Jesus, our true king, said he will come again, and we want to do all we can to be ready to welcome him when he returns, right? Well, every Sabbath we have a chance to practice welcoming our king as he comes into our home to bring us a blessing. Why put off God to the last minute anyway? When catching a plane, I like to get to the airport early. If I'm going to wait a little while, I would rather wait at the terminal packed and ready to go than to wait at home and fret over whether some traffic problem is going to make me miss my flight. I say be ready early. And that's the way it is with the Sabbath. When it's coming to an end, don't watch the clock, blow the whistle, and announce it's over. We can finally do our own thing now. That makes Jesus feel like you're in a hurry to show him the door. Remember, if you keep the Sabbath with your heart, you might be accused of being legalistic and pharisaical and fanatical, but it will always be worth it in your relationship with God. Jesus is the one you are seeking to please, not man. In fact, let's take some time to see how God's people honored him over their own self-interest and in the face of persecution and the doubts of those around them. And this is going to talk about Daniel and King Darius, but for another time. This is the end of the video. We'll continue on later with part 2 of the study. Thanks for listening and have a good day. Bye-bye.